The Empress of the Vethrani Dominion lifted the spoon to her lips, and every noble in the reception hall held their breath. Marcus Chen stood frozen behind his small cooking station, watching the most powerful being in 3-star systems taste his grandmother's chicken soup. He had been brought here as a curiosity, a human chef from Earth's fledgling colony on Kepler 442b, invited to demonstrate primitive Terran culinary traditions for the amusement of the court. What no one had told him, what he had only learned 30 seconds ago from the horrified whisper of a serving drone, was that Terran proteins were mildly toxic to Vethrani physiology. The Empress swallowed. A collective gasp rippled through the assembled nobility. High Counselor Vareth stepped forward, his silver-blue skin flushing dark with fury. Your Radiance, you cannot... The human food is... I am aware of what it is, Counselor. Empress Sirith's voice was cool as starlight. She set down the spoon with deliberate precision. I am also aware that this man traveled 47 light days at our invitation to share his culture's traditions. To refuse his offering would be an insult to both him and the diplomatic principles this court claims to uphold. Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs. Your Radiance, I didn't know. Please, you don't have to. The decision is made. Her eyes met his, vast, luminous pools of violet that seemed to see through every layer of his being. It is... not... adequate. The word hung in the air. In Vethrani court language, Marcus would later learn, adequate from an empress was the equivalent of a standing ovation. But in that moment, all he could see was the slight tremor in her elegant fingers as she set them flat against the table, and the way her chest rose and fell just slightly too fast beneath her ceremonial robes. She was already feeling the effects. The demonstration is concluded, High Counselor Vareth announced, his tone making it clear that Marcus's presence was no longer welcome. The human will be escorted back to... The human will dine with me this evening. The Empress rose from her throne, and despite the obvious strain in her movements, her bearing remained regal. I find I have questions about Terran customs. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus had spent 3 years on Kepler 442b after losing his restaurant, his savings, and his wife in the economic collapse that had driven Earth's excess population to the colonies. He had rebuilt himself from nothing, cooking for miners and terraformers who didn't care about presentation, only that the food reminded them of home. He had learned to make do with alien ingredients, to stretch rations, to feed 50 people with supplies for 20. He had never learned how to refuse an empress. I would be honored, Your Radiance, he said, and the words felt strange in his mouth, formal, inadequate for the weight of what had just happened. As guards escorted him from the hall, he glanced back once. The Empress was speaking with her advisors, her posture perfect, her expression serene. But beneath her left eye, almost invisible against her pale blue skin, a single dark vein had begun to show. She was poisoning herself. For him. For a bowl of his grandmother's soup. The quarters they gave him were nicer than anything he'd lived in since Earth. Marcus paced the crystalline floor, running through every toxicology course he'd taken during his colonial training. Vethrani couldn't process certain amino acids found in Earth proteins. The effects were usually mild, nausea, fatigue, slight neural inflammation. Usually, Vethrani weren't stupid enough to actually consume the stuff. A chime sounded at his door. He opened it to find a young Vethrani woman in the crimson robes of a royal attendant. Her expression was carefully neutral, but her hands were clasped too tightly in front of her. I am Lyris, she said. First attendant to Her Radiance. You will come with me. Is she? Marcus stopped himself. Of course she wasn't all right. How bad is it? Something flickered in Lyris's eyes. Surprised, perhaps, that he would ask. That he would care. The court physicians are monitoring her condition. It is manageable. She paused. Why did you not refuse to cook for her? You must have known this was a trap. A trap? High Counselor Vareth arranged this demonstration specifically to humiliate you. To show the court that humans are too primitive to even understand basic interspecies biology. Her voice dropped. He did not expect Her Radiance to actually eat the food. Marcus let out a slow breath. Neither did I. Then, why did you not stop her? Because by the time I realized what was happening, it was already too late. Because she moved so fast, so deliberately, that I didn't have time to think. Because when she looked at me, I saw something in her eyes that I recognized. Loneliness. Take me to her, he said instead. The Empress's private dining chamber was smaller than Marcus had expected, intimate, almost. A single table of black stone stood in the center, surrounded by bioluminescent plants that cast soft blue-green shadows across the walls. The Empress sat at one end, her ceremonial robes exchanged for a simpler gown of deep purple. Without the elaborate headdress, she looked younger, more vulnerable, and unmistakably unwell. You may leave us, Lyris, she said. The attendant hesitated. Your Radiance. That was not a request. Lyris bowed and withdrew. The door sealed behind her with a soft hiss, leaving Marcus alone with the most powerful woman in the known galaxy. Sit, the Empress said, gesturing to the chair across from her. You have questions. I can see them crowding behind your eyes. Marcus sat. Up close he could see the dark veins more clearly now, spreading in delicate patterns beneath the skin of her temples. Her breathing was shallow, controlled. Why? He asked. Why? Why would you do that to yourself? You could have refused. You could have sent me away. No one would have blamed you. No one would have blamed me, she repeated, her tone thoughtful. No. They would have blamed you. The ignorant human who dared present toxic food to the Empress. You would have been executed before sunrise, and Vareth would have had his diplomatic incident to use against Earth's colonial charter. So you poisoned yourself to save my life. I consumed a mild irritant to prevent an injustice. She tilted her head, studying him. You seem distressed by this. Why? We are not of the same people. You owe me nothing. Marcus thought of his grandmother, who had taught him to cook in her tiny kitchen in Taipei, who had always said that food was love, made visible, who had died 3 months before he left Earth, never knowing that the world she'd lived in was about to crumble. Earth food is poison to her kind, he said quietly, and the Empress ate my cooking to not hurt my feelings. Sirith's eyes widened slightly, the first unguarded reaction he'd seen from her. That is not. She stopped. That is a simplified interpretation. Is it wrong? Silence stretched between them. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than before. I have ruled the Dominion for 47 cycles. In that time I have attended 10,000 banquets, received tribute from 100 worlds, and tasted every delicacy the galaxy has to offer. Do you know how many of those meals were prepared by someone who simply wanted to share something meaningful with me? Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. None, she said. Until today. 3 days passed before Marcus was summoned again. He spent the time in a state of anxious uncertainty, confined to his quarters with only the occasional visit from Lyris to assure him that the Empress was recovering. The court physicians had administered counteragents. The neural inflammation was subsiding. He was not to worry. He worried anyway. On the 4th morning, Lyris appeared at his door with an expression he couldn't quite read. Her Radiance requests your presence in the Garden of Ancestors, she said. You will bring your cooking implements. Marcus blinked. She wants me to cook for her again? She wishes to understand the process. To observe. Lyris paused, then added in a lower voice. The court is unsettled. There has been no precedent for an Empress taking such interest in a foreign visitor, particularly a human. Should I be worried? You should be careful. Her eyes met his. High Counselor Vareth has not abandoned his ambitions. If anything, her Radiance's actions have made him more determined. The Garden of Ancestors was a vast enclosed space at the heart of the palace, filled with trees that had been grown from genetic samples of every Vithrani world. The air was thick with unfamiliar scents, and the light filtered down through a crystalline dome that shifted colors with the movement of the clouds outside. The Empress was waiting beneath a tree with silver bark and leaves that chimed softly in the artificial breeze. She wore no crown today, no ceremonial robes, only a simple gown of pale gray that made her look almost ordinary. Almost. I have had my physicians prepare a list of Terran ingredients that will not cause me harm, she said without preamble. You will teach me to prepare a meal using only these. Marcus stared at her. You want to learn to cook? Is that so strange? You're an Empress, and an Empress cannot desire to understand the traditions of another people. She raised one eyebrow. I was under the impression that humans valued cultural exchange. We do. He ran a hand through his hair, struggling to find the right words. Your Radiance, the last time you ate my food, you were bedridden for 3 days, which is why I am taking precautions. She held up a small data pad. These ingredients have been tested. They are safe. And I would appreciate it if you would address me as Sirith when we are alone. I find the constant formality tiresome. Something shifted in Marcus's chest, a warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. He tried to push it down to remind himself that she was an alien Empress and he was a refugee cook from a failed colony, but the warmth remained. All right, he said. Sirith. What would you like to learn to make? She considered for a moment. You spoke of your grandmother. You said her recipes were important to you. Teach me one of those. Most of them would be dangerous for you. Then, adapt. Show me how a human cook thinks. Marcus looked at the list of approved ingredients on the datapad. Some were familiar. Vegetables that had been imported to the colonies, proteins that had been engineered for compatibility. Others were of Vithrani staples he had never seen before. He thought of his grandmother, standing in her kitchen with flour on her hands and a smile on her face. She had always said that the recipe was just a starting point. The real cooking happened when you let go of the instructions and trusted your instincts. Okay, he said. Let's make dumplings. Teaching an empress to fold dumplings was not something Marcus had ever imagined himself doing. Cirith's first attempts were disasters, misshapen, leaking, falling apart at the seams. But she approached each failure with the same focused intensity that Marcus imagined she brought to matters of state, analyzing what had gone wrong and adjusting her technique. You're thinking too much, he said after her fifth attempt collapsed in her hands. Cooking isn't about precision, it's about feeling. Feeling? She looked at him with something like skepticism. In my culture, excellence is achieved through discipline and repetition. One does not feel one's way to mastery. But you're not making art for a museum. You're making food. He moved closer, taking her hands in his before he could think better of it. Her skin was cool, smooth, and she went very still at his touch. Sorry, I should have asked. No. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Show me. Marcus guided her fingers through the folding motion, pressing the edges together, creating the pleats that would hold the filling inside. Her hands were elegant, long-fingered, built for gestures of command rather than kitchen work. But they learned quickly. There, he said as she completed her first successful dumpling. See? Not so hard. Cirith stared at the small, imperfect creation in her palm as if it were a precious gem. I made this, she said. You did. It is asymmetrical. Best dumplings usually are. She looked up at him, and for just a moment, the mask of imperial composure slipped entirely. What Marcus saw beneath it was raw and unguarded, wonder and gratitude, and something that might have been hope. In 73 years of life, she said quietly, no one has ever taught me to make something with my own hands. Marcus didn't know what to say to that, so he simply smiled and handed her another piece of dough. Then let's make more. They cooked together for hours. Marcus learned that Cirith had been crowned at 19, after her mother's death in a border conflict, that she had never married, despite constant pressure from the council, that the loneliness of her position was a weight she carried every day, invisible to everyone around her. In return, he told her about Earth, about his grandmother's kitchen, about his wife, who had left him when the restaurant failed, who had said she couldn't watch him destroy himself trying to save something that was already dead, about the colony ship, and the 3 years of rebuilding, and the way cooking had become not just his profession but his anchor. You speak of your craft with great passion, Cirith observed as they sat together, sampling the results of their work. Among my people, such emotional investment in one's occupation is considered unseemly. We are taught to perform our duties with detachment. Sounds lonely. It is efficient. Those aren't mutually exclusive. She considered this, turning a dumpling over in her fingers. Perhaps not. She took a bite, chewing thoughtfully. This is good. Just good? A smile ghosted across her lips, small, quickly hidden, but unmistakably real. Very good, she amended. Though I suspect you would say that is because we made it together. Would I be wrong? She didn't answer. But she didn't look away either, and in the soft light of the garden, Marcus thought he saw something change in her eyes. A beginning. A possibility. A door, cracking, opened. The summons came at midnight, 3 weeks after that first cooking lesson. Marcus had grown accustomed to the rhythm of palace life by then. Morning audiences where he stood invisible among the other foreign visitors. Afternoon sessions in the garden with Cirith, their cooking lessons evolving into long conversations that stretched late into the evening. The careful dance of public distance and private intimacy that they had learned to navigate without ever quite acknowledging what it meant. But the midnight summons was different. Lyris's face was pale when she delivered it, her hands trembling. There has been an accusation, she said. High Counselor Vareth has convened an emergency session of the Noble Assembly. You must come at once. An accusation of what? Lyris wouldn't meet his eyes. Of bewitching the Empress. The Noble Assembly chamber was vast, designed to intimidate. Tiers of seats rose on either side, filled with Vethrani nobles in their formal robes of state. At the far end, on a throne of black crystal, sat Cirith, her face a mask of perfect composure, her hands gripping the armrests so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. High Counselor Vareth stood in the center of the chamber, his silver-blue skin gleaming under the harsh lights. For 3 cycles, we have watched our Empress devote unprecedented attention to a human, he intoned, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. A member of a species so primitive, they cannot even manage their own biosphere. A creature of no rank, no lineage, no worth. Marcus felt the weight of 1,000 hostile stares pressing down on him. Guards flanked him on either side, their weapons humming with barely contained energy. This human, Vareth continued, has somehow convinced our radiance to poison herself with his food, to spend hours in private audience with him, to neglect her duties to the Dominion in favor of his company. He turned to face Marcus directly. The only explanation is sorcery. Mind manipulation. Some Terran technique of mental control that we have not yet identified. That's insane, Marcus said. Humans don't have. The accused will be silent. Let him speak. Sirith's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. She rose from her throne, and despite her relative youth compared to the ancient nobles surrounding her, there was no mistaking the authority in her bearing. Marcus Chen, you have been accused of using unnatural influence to compromise the judgment of your Empress. How do you answer? Marcus looked at her, really looked, past the formal mask to the woman he'd come to know over the past weeks. The woman who laughed at his terrible jokes. Who still struggled with the pleading on dumplings. Who had confessed, late one evening, that she sometimes dreamed of walking away from everything and living as an ordinary person. He could deny the accusation. He could play the political game, speak the careful words that might save his life, but would distance him from her forever. Or he could tell the truth. I love her, he said. The chamber erupted. Nobles shouted. Guards raised their weapons. Vareth's face twisted with triumph. He admits it. He admits to corrupting. I love her, Marcus repeated, louder this time. Not because of sorcery or mind control. Because she's brilliant and lonely and kind. Because she ate food that she knew would make her sick rather than let an innocent man be executed. Because she's been carrying the weight of an empire alone for almost 50 years, and no one ever taught her that it's okay to need someone. He stepped forward, shaking off the guard's restraining hands. You want to know what my unnatural influence is? I listened to her. I saw her as a person, not a symbol. I showed her that her worth isn't measured by her usefulness to your dominion. He turned to face the assembly. If that's a crime, then yes, I'm guilty. Execute me if you want, but don't pretend this is about protecting her. This is about controlling her. Silence. Then, slowly, Sirith began to descend from her throne. Your radiance, Vareth hissed. You cannot. I can do whatever I choose. She walked past him without a glance, her steps steady and sure, until she stood before Marcus. The laws of this dominion require that accusations of mental manipulation be verified by the Temple of Truth. Until such verification occurs, the accused is presumed innocent. The temple's procedures take months, Vareth protested. In the meantime, Marcus Chen will remain under my personal protection. She looked at Marcus, and for just a moment, the mask cracked. Do you truly love me? Yes, despite what I am. Despite what it would cost you. Marcus thought of his grandmother, of the wife who had left him, of every loss he'd ever suffered, and every wall he'd built around his heart. Because of what you are, he said. All of it. The good, and the bad, and the lonely, and the strong. I love all of it. Sirith closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. Then I have a confession of my own. She turned to face the assembly. For 47 cycles I have served this dominion faithfully. I have sacrificed my youth, my freedom, my chance at personal happiness for the good of our people. I have asked nothing in return. Her voice rose. Today, I am asking. This man has broken no law. He has committed no crime. And I will not allow him to be destroyed simply because loving me makes certain members of this court uncomfortable. She reached out and took Marcus's hand. If the assembly wishes to challenge my judgment, she said, they may do so through proper channels. But I will not be separated from him. I will not pretend that what we have is anything other than what it is. And I will not apologize for finally, after almost a century of service, finding someone who makes me feel less alone. The chamber was utterly silent. Then, from somewhere in the upper tiers, a single noble began to applaud. Then, another. Then, a dozen. Vareth's face went gray with fury. He opened his mouth to speak, and Lyris stepped forward. High Counselor, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. I have evidence that you arranged the initial cooking demonstration with full knowledge of Terran food's toxicity. Evidence that you intended for the Empress to be embarrassed into executing an innocent man. Evidence that this tribunal is not about protecting our Empress, but about removing her from power. She held up a data crystal. Shall I present it to the assembly? The applause grew louder. Vareth looked around wildly, seeking allies, finding only turned backs and averted eyes. This isn't over, he hissed. Yes, Sirith said calmly. It is. The wedding was small by imperial standards, only 3,000 guests. Marcus stood at the altar of the Temple of Bonds, wearing ceremonial robes that felt strange against his skin, watching Sirith walk toward him through the gathered crowd. She wore white, as was Vithrani tradition, but she had insisted on incorporating elements of human wedding customs as well. A veil. Flowers. A human minister to speak alongside the Vethrani priest. A fusion, she had called it. Like the cooking they did together. The ceremony was long, full of rituals he didn't entirely understand. But when the priest asked if he would bond himself to this woman, body and spirit, through all the cycles of their lives, the answer came easily. I will. And when Cirith spoke the same words, her voice steady and sure, Marcus felt something settle into place in his chest. A rightness. A home. You may seal the bond, the priest intoned. In Vethrani tradition, this meant a formal touching of foreheads. But Cirith leaned in and kissed him instead, a brief, soft press of lips that sent a ripple of scandalized murmurs through the crowd. That's not traditional, Marcus whispered when she pulled back. I am the Empress, she replied, smiling. I make the traditions. The reception was held in the Garden of Ancestors, beneath the silver tree where they had first cooked together. Tables had been set up throughout the space, laden with dishes that Marcus had helped prepare, Vethrani delicacies alongside Terran recipes adapted for alien palates. The dumplings are a particular success, Lord Tethras observed, approaching them with a plate piled high with the small parcels. Though I must admit, I never expected to see human cuisine served at an imperial wedding. Times change, Cirith said. Cultures evolve. It is the mark of a great civilization that it can learn from others. Tethras nodded thoughtfully. Your mother would have found this interesting. My mother would have had Marcus executed on the first day. Cirith's voice was dry. But I am not my mother. No, Tethras agreed. You are not. He bowed and withdrew, leaving them alone for a moment in the swirl of the celebration. Regrets? Marcus asked. None. She took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. I spent my whole life believing that duty and happiness were mutually exclusive, that to serve my people, I had to sacrifice everything else. She looked at him. You showed me that I was wrong. I made you dumplings. That's not exactly revolutionary. You made me feel seen. She raised his hand to her lips and kissed his knuckles. In a lifetime of being observed, assessed, and judged, no one had ever simply seen me. Until you. Marcus pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her in an embrace that was thoroughly improper for an empress and entirely perfect for the woman he loved. So what happens now? He asked. Now we rule together. We build bridges between our peoples. We show the galaxy that strength and gentleness can coexist. She pulled back enough to look at him. And occasionally, when the burdens of empire become too heavy, we retire to our kitchen and make dumplings. That sounds like a good life. It will be. She smiled, that rare, genuine smile that she showed only to him. After all, I have an excellent teacher. Around them the celebration continued. Nobles mingled with human diplomats. Vethrani musicians played alongside a string quartet from Earth. And in the midst of it all, the Empress of the Vethrani Dominion stood in the arms of a refugee cook from a failed colony, and for the first time in her long, lonely life, felt completely at peace. Later that night, after the last guests had departed, and the garden had fallen quiet, they sat together beneath the silver tree, sharing the last of the dumplings. I never told you, Cirith said quietly, what I felt that first day. When I ate your soup, you said it was adequate. I lied. She looked at him. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever tasted. Not because of the poison, but because of what it represented. Kindness without agenda. Generosity without expectation. I had forgotten such things existed. And now? She leaned her head against his shoulder. Now I remember. Every day, with every meal we share, every moment we spend together. You remind me that the universe is full of unexpected gifts. She closed her eyes. I am grateful, my love. More than I can say. Marcus pressed a kiss to the top of her head. So am I. And there, in the quiet heart of an alien garden, beneath stars that neither of them had been born to, they began their life together. Not as Empress and commoner. Not as alien and human. Just two people who had found each other across the vast, improbable distances of the universe, and who had chosen, against all odds, to stay.